We'll do the Mamer. Ze HaYom Techilas Ma'asecha Zikaron Liyom Rishon. The Rebbe said this Mamer on Leil Erev Rosh Hashanah Tafshin Mem Beis, and later on the Mamer was published in the booklet, the Kuntras of Rosh Hashanah Tafshin Mem Tes. And this was, as written in the booklet, for Rosh Hashanah, third day and of Slichas. That's when it was published, the year of Hakel, the year Tavshim Mem Ches. So they printed it in Tavshim Mem Ches for the booklet Rosh Hashanah Tavshim Mem Tes. In Maimorim Mulukotim, Chelik Aleph, this is Maimer number 6. In this Maimer, the Rebbe basically brings down from the Tzemach Tzedek, whose birthday, Yom HaLedes, is an Erev Rosh Hashanah, and the Rebbe brings down the different areas of Hamshocha that takes place on Rosh Hashanah. When we daven, basically we say, Zeh HaYom Techilas Ma'asecha, that all the creation began, and this is Rosh Hashanah. But then the pasuk says Zikaron Liyom Rishon, that this is actually a reminder for the first day, which would be the 25th day of Elul. So the Rebbe explains in the Maimeh, these are two different levels. There is the level that comes Zehayim Tchilas Masecha, when it comes Mitzad Avodas Ha'odom, and then there is the Avodah, the way it comes Mitzad the Eibishter, which is Liyom Rishon. Over there it comes because of Chafetz Chesed. And here too, in Chafetz Chesed itself, the Rebbe explains there is the Chafetz Chesed, the Yisraelus, that Hashem was Yisrael to be Chafetz Chesed Giluyim, to create a world. And then there is, and the reason why there was the Yisraelus is because of the Neshamas Yisrael, Olu b'machshove, and Nimlach b'nishmesem shel tzadikim, so the Eibishter sort of speak, imagine the nachas ruach that he will have from the avodah of Yidden tzadikim, amich kulam tzadikim, and therefore the Eibishter created the world, and it was chafetz chesed. But then there is even a higher level, which is after the poil mamish the avodah sa'odam. This is all in his oiridus, in machshava atzmis. Over there, there's a disconnect between that rotzin, the his oiridus, and the chafetz chesed, and what is nimshach in the world is separated from the atzmus, which was nisoirer. But there is the avoid of Yidna B'Poel Mamish, which brings in even a higher level. I know I'm saying a lot of these words here, but we will see it all explained, articulated in the Mamer. Then the Rebbe connects it also to Malchi Zechrenis V'Shofres. We'll go step by step, and we'll learn inside. B'Siyaita D'Shmayo, Leil Erev Rosh Hashanah Hei Tov Shimem Beis. So the Rebbe begins, Zeh HaYom Techilas Ma'asecha Zikaron Liyom Rishon. We say in the davening that this day, which is talking about the Rosh Hashanah, is the beginning of Hashem's doing, meaning the beginning of creation. But it continues in the same sentence, Zikaron Liyom Rishon. This is a reminder for the first day. So the Rebbe begins with Medayik Admur HaTzemach Tzedek. So the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, is Medayik, asks the question over here, Bal Yom HaHeiledes Erev Rosh Hashanah, the ones whose birthday is on Erev Rosh Hashanah. The Rebbe is quoting the Tzemach Tzedek and saying that that is actually today, when he gives the Mamer, is actually his birthday. It seems that there is a contradiction from the beginning of the sentence to the end of the sentence. Why? The Pirush Zeh HaYom Techilas Ma'asecha. This is the day of the beginning. And Tehillah Mamish, we say this is actually the beginning. That's when it started. That Ma'asecha, creation, Hashem's action started on Zeh HaYom. Hu sheberosh Hashanah. That would mean that on Rosh Hashanah, which is Zeh Hayom, that's the day. Who has cholas his havus kol ha'olamos. That is the beginning of creation, bringing into being all the worlds. It all started on Rosh Hashanah. Hainu. And what does it mean? It means that Take Rosh Hashanah in the first time, but it's really happening every year. Shebechol Rosh Hashanah, that on every Rosh Hashanah, mishavim kol ha'olomis mechodesh k'moi shehoye b'pam harishona. That on every Rosh Hashanah, all worlds are once again being brought into being, are being created just like it was on the first Rosh Hashanah. So we're saying Zahayim Techilas Masecha, and on Rosh Hashanah this happens again, that the Eibishter again brings all creation into being. It happens on Rosh Hashanah. So that's one part, which is mashma, that this day everything started on Rosh Hashanah. Upirusha, what is the meaning in the second sentence? Zikaron liyom rishon. It's a reminder. That means that this day is not when it started, but it reminds us of the first day. Who Sharesh Hashanah, who rak zikaron liyom rishon. That Rosh Hashanah is not the beginning of the action, but it reminds us of the first day, which reminds us of Chafei Elul, when it actually all began. So we have a contradiction from the beginning. We say this is when it all began, and then we're saying it's a reminder to when it all began. So what is it? And the Tzemach Tzedek explains we actually have two aspects in the Rosh Hashanah. We have Rosh Hashanah being the beginning of all the actions, and we also have it as a reminder. Tzemach Tzedek will explain that the a second part, the Rebbe explains that the second part, as a reminder, is a follow-up, and it's even a greater level. First, we say that today is Techilas Masecha, which it all began. Even a higher level is that it's a reminder for what happened to Yom Rishon, when it happened mitzad the Chafetz Chesed of Hashem. Mevayer Bozeh, so the Tzemach Tzedek explains in this, the Rosh Hashanah yeshnam shnei ha'inyonim. Rosh Hashanah we have these both aspects. Shehu Techilas Ma'asecha, it's the beginning of the action, and also b'Shehu Zikaron liyom rishon, it is also a remember to what took place on the first day, on the 25th of Elul. The fact the Rebbe says, so we have two areas here, but how do we start off? We say first, on Rosh Hashanah is the beginning, it all started on Rosh Hashanah. Then you continue and say that it's a reminder for Yom Rishon. That's an additional point. Muchach, so that's evident. The Rosh Hashanah, the fact that Rosh Hashanah is a reminder for Yom Rishon, that second aspect in Rosh Hashanah, that it's a reminder of Rosh Yom Rishon, that's a higher level than that it's Chilas Masechos, that is the beginning of creation. So these two aspects in the Rosh Hashanah, one that is the beginning of all creation, and then that it's also a reminder, is the second aspect. The reminder is greater than that it's the beginning of the action, because we start off, today was everything created, then we say it's a reminder of the Yom Rishon. So why is that a greater level? The Rebbe will explain that this comes through Avodas Odom Techilas Masacho, which is Asarusa Dilatato, which can reach, it's a level of Hishtalshalus, but we have the level of Zikaron Liyam Rishon, which comes Lemailo, which is higher than Hishtalshalus, as the Rebbe will explain. But first, the Rebbe wants to explain what does it mean that we just said the Torah aspect, these are just words. We're saying that everything began on Rosh Hashanah, but it did not really begin on Rosh Hashanah. We know it began on Chafei Elul. So the Rebbe is first going to explain what it means that it began on Rosh Hashanah. That's when it really began. And after the Rebbe will explain that, he will see, and once we understand that, how Zikaron Liyam Rishon is even a higher level. So the Yuvan Zer Behagdim Habiyur will understand this by introducing the explanation. This that we say on Rosh Hashanah, this is the beginning of your action. The Yadu Hashayla Bazeh, known question, the question about this is known. The world was created on the 25th day of Elul. Rosh Hashanah hu Yom Brei Adam Harishon. But the Rosh Hashanah is the day that first man was created. Shehu Yom Vav Lemaise Breishis. That is the 6 days to the act of the beginning. This was not the first, it was the 6th day. Shaboy, in the 6th day, HaYosef V'Gamar Habriya. Then it was the end, the conclusion of creation. How do we say about the 6th day that this is the beginning of Hashem's actions, the beginning of Maise Bereshis, when in reality this is on the 6th day, the end of Maise Bereshis? So what are we saying that is Techilas Masach? How could we say about this day that is Techilas Masach? The Rebbe is going to bring down two biurim. Now, first, the Rebbe is going to explain that all the actions, all the creation is there for the purpose, and the purpose is through man. Adam Harisha brings purpose in creation for what they were created. So therefore, everything in the world really begins, its purpose only came to light when the Adam Harishan was created. So that means that is when that creation began. That's the first explanation. And the second explanation the Rebbe will give, that the person's creation actually brought in it's not another explanation, a deeper explanation, so that the person's creation brought in retroactively a level in creation, so it means it was all created now. Let's look inside. The explanation is here. The Tachlis HaKavona Dibriyas HaOlam Hu Sheyiyeh Boi Gilui Elikus. The ultimate intent of creating a world is that in the world should be a revelation of godliness. It shouldn't be just a creation of a world. That's not the goal. The goal is that the world that is being created should sense there should be a revelation of godliness in that world. How far does that revelation of godliness needs to take place in the world? So the Rebbe says, "Va'ah," to the extent she'al yidei kol prat uprat shebehabriya, to the extent that through every detail and detail that is in creation, yizgala k'veidah shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the glory of Hashem will be revealed. It will be in every aspect of the world we should be able to appreciate and bring about, and that should bring a revelation of godliness. Mamer Razal this is, as the saying of our sages of blessed memory, the siyum v'choisum the meseches ovis, in the end, in the conclusion of Perkei Ovis, so there it says that Kol Masha Bara Hakadosh Baruch Hu Ba'olamo, everything that Hashem created in this world, Lo Yibra Ela L'Chavodo, He didn't create it only for the purpose to His glory. That means that every detail in the world needs to bring about the glory of Hashem into the world. That's why Hashem created. So that's why the Gila Lakus is in every detail and detail to bring about, because that's why it was created, to glorify Hashem's every detail. So how do we bring about, how does this glory of Hashem revealed in the world? The Gilu is this revelation that takes place, that happens through the service of man. That's why we say about the first day of Rosh Hashanah, this day is the beginning of your actions. Because this aspect, that this should be godliness in the world, which is the Kushu de Maasecha. That's the intent. What Maasecha is not just to create it, but to have a revelation of godliness. Huschal b'yoyim brei ha'odom. This actually started when the man was created. That is when the revelation of godliness in the world begins. That's the starting of them. That starts now. Not only, as the Rebbe points out, the potential for revelation of the world starts with the human being created. With Adam Harishon, beforehand, it cannot be. So it's not only for the potential Adam Harishon to bring shleimus, but it actually started. Adam Harishon, the right in the very beginning, he brought down godliness into the world, and as soon as he was created, so it actually happened that Gilu Elokus, the Lloyd, the Neis of Lozeh. In addition to this, Sha'oz Das Kenasis Ha'efshorish Gilu Elokus, that then on Rosh Hashanah, the creation of man, so then, only then, becomes the possibility for being godliness in the world, because godliness in the world comes through man. And that is when man was created. And that's when the possibility for revelation of godliness began. In addition to that, Nasos came Gam Bepoil. It actually happened then, in actuality. Mamer Azal, this is as the saying of our sages, that b'yom shenivra Adam b'yom Harishon b'yom shenivra, that Adam Harishon, on the day that he was created, hichriz l'chol habruim, he made an announcement to all created beings. As the Pasuk says in Tehillim, that boyu nishtachave v'nichro nivrecha lifnei Hashem Eisenu. Adam Harishon was talking to all of creation, says, let's go. Let's prostrate ourselves. Let's kneel. Let's bend ourselves before Hashem, our Maker. The idea of recognition of creations, that there is Hashem, our Maker, and we should prostrate and bow and kneel ourselves before Hashem. And what was the response? V'kulam anu v'amru, and they all responded, and they said, Hashem Malach Geus Lavish. So we see that Adam Harishon immediately impacted that revelation of godliness in the world. So the Rebbe explains now, so why do we say Zeh HaYom Techilas Maasecha, Why is this still the beginning? Okay, that's the beginning of the kavanah. Why do we say that this is the actual action? And the Rebbe explains that everything, when it comes out in action in Poel Mamish, that points to its complete. That's when it was really done. Until the kavanah, until it came down into action, it's not yet fully complete. That it's completed. So Techilas Maasecha, when is the completeness of Maasecha? Is when it comes down into action. So Yesh Loimar, Zeh She'oimrim, Zeh HaYom Techilas Maasecha. Why do we say this is the beginning of your action? But l'chayre, it's not the action. Hagam sheresh Hashanah, hu l'chayre rak hascholos hamikuvan de Maasecha. Even though Rosh Hashanah is only the beginning of the intent of your action, not the beginning of the action. The action started before. We explained that the purpose is to bring godliness. So why are we saying this is the beginning of the actual action? Who the reason is, Rebbe explains, Kimaisa moira al hashlemus, because when we say the action, that points to the completeness of the matter we're talking about. When we talk about uh, creation, since the uh, completeness in creation comes with the intent, that's when it's made. Because action shows that it's wholesome, that it's complete. Just like by a person, hashlemus the whole inyan. What is the wholesomeness? Every aspect, when it actually comes down in actuality. So the same thing is above. What we want to say, what is the wholesomeness of creation, is when it actually comes down below, that the creation in action becomes infused with the kavanah. That's when it's really happening. So just like by a person, the shlemus is when it comes down actuality, same thing is above, when the creation's purpose is fulfilled on Rosh Hashanah. That means that that's when it happens. Now, the Rebbe corrects in the bracket, it's not like because it's so by a person, shlemus is through action. So therefore, the Eibishter's actions, shlemus is through action. What goes the other way around? Why is it by a person that the action is shlemus? Is because that's the shlemus by Hashem. On the contrary, mizen nishtalshul kain gam bod matachten. That from the fact that by Lemailon, the shlemus is when it comes to action, from this it evolved also to the person below, because Adam Elyon, the person is named Adam. Adam comes from compare. The Adam is compared Elyon, to the Supreme, to Hashem. So because the way it works above by Hashem, that the shlemus is from, when it comes to action, when the Eibishter's Bria gets the Mekuvon, that the person brings down that Gilu Elokus into the Kavanah, into creation, that that brings about also by every person the Shlemus is when it comes down in the Poel. So Shlemus the Kol Seder HaHishtalshelus Hibasiya Davke. The wholesomeness of all of the Seder Hishtalshelus is when it comes to the world of Asiya. You have the higher world, but when it comes in Asiya, that's is the Shlemus. And when it comes in this world, and Adam Rishon does the work, that's when it's all complete. That's when the Bria is complete. That means that it's begin. That's what it comes to. It's uh, Shlemus, and that is when it's done. Zehu Zeh Hayoim Techilas Maasecha. And we say this is when we say this is the beginning of your action, meaning what you did, the beginning of the action you completed, the Maise Moide al Hashlemus. Maise shows on completeness. So it's the day that it's happening. Today is the beginning of your actions are happening. The Maisim are happening on Rosh Hashanah. Shayom the Rosh Hashanah, that the day of Rosh Hashanah. Yom Berei Adam Harishon, the day that Adam Harishon was born, was created. Who has cholas shleimus sabriya. That begins the completeness of creation. It starts is with Adam Harishon. That is when things are complete, and that begins the completeness of the wholesomeness of creation. And the Rebbe adds now also that is associated with the word Zeh. So basically, today on Rosh Hashanah, when man was created, that is the fulfillment of creation, the purpose of creation. That is when creation is actually comes down into action through Adam Rishon. So this is the beginning of the Maisa, the action, the Shlemus begins with Rosh Hashanah. This also explains why we say Zeh HaYom, because both Zeh HaYom are Gilui. We don't say Rosh Hashanah Techilas Masach. We say Zeh HaYom Techilas Masach, because we're trying to imply that the Zeh, which is pointing with your finger, which means you see a revelation. HaYom is also day, is a revelation. That is what makes this day the beginning of Masecha, because it all came down through Adam Harishon, that Zeh HaYom, through the revelation. This is also the reason why Rosh Hashanah is referred to, called here, Behemshech Litchilas Maasecha, that as a continuation to saying this is the beginning of Maasecha, meaning the idea, we want to say that this is Tchilas Maasecha, so we say Zeh HaYom, B'Shem Zeh HaYom, the Zeh HaYom Ugilu B'Tachlis, because Zeh HaYom is total revelation. Why total? Because it's two. Zeh is revelation hayom, and Zeh hayom is total revelation. Zeh moide al gilui. Zeh points to revelation. Like we say, you point with your finger and say Zeh. This is it. So when you can point with your finger and say Zeh, means that you see it. That's called revelation. V'yom, and then it says also yom moide al gilui. Yom is also points to revelation. The Kim called Oir light, he called Yom. Oir is light, revelation, when you can see. That's Oir. V'zeh hayom, and they have two. Zeh hayom, beis l'shonis shel gilu, which is two languages of revelation. U'tachlis hagilu. That's what we're saying. Tachlis hagilu. So that's why the pasuk says here Zeh hayom, because this is the ultimate gilu. V'zehu Zeh hayoim tchilas maasecha. This is the meaning now of the saying, this hayoim, the revelation, that is tchilas maasecha, that's the beginning of the action. The Zeh shereish Hashanah tchilas maasecha, this that Reish Hashanah is the beginning of action, that this is the beginning of Asiya, that it came down, the doing, the practicing is Haschola Shlemus Habriya, that when the completeness of the Bria started with the creation of Adam Habriya Arishon, Zayim Techilas, Masecha, the beginning of the Shlemus, that is here, Hu Sha'oz Hischil Inyan HaGilui. That is the time that the idea of revelation came about, the HaYom, Inyan HaYom. The idea of Eidosa Shel Adam Harishon Nasa Gilu Elokus Ba'ilum Kinal, through the service of Adam Harishon, that brought about a revelation of godliness in the world. As we said before, Boyu Nishtachve V'Nichra, he brought about it, which is Inyan Zeh, which is the idea of Zeh. So basically, the Rebbe brought down the question, how could we say that Techilas Masecha, beginning of the action, is Rosh Hashanah, when the world was created 6 days earlier? Rosh Hashanah is the sixth day, the last day of creation. And the Rebbe explains that since Rosh Hashanah, the person was created who brings the kavanah and of creation, and he brings it down into Asiya, bringing down things in action is really the beginning of what it's all about, because before it is really comes down to Asiya, it's not really fully there. It's only there. So, and Rabbi explains, that's why it says, Zeh HaYom, this Yom, which both Zeh and HaYom, which means, why is it Techilas Masecha? What makes it Techilas Masecha is the fact that the revelation is brought about through Adam Harishon, and that makes it the Maisa, the creation, that it becomes into an action that's really created. The beginning begins with Adam Harishon. The Rebbe now in Neis Gimel is going to explain it deeper by saying that this impact, that the action of Adam Harishon on the sixth day works also retroactively. So it means that everything is actually being created, because this is actually retroactively happening now, when Adam Harishon brought in that Gilui into the world, even the days that preceded the days became different than they were before. They were now infused with the Gilui Elokus, and therefore that is real creation. So the previous days are also being created now, as the Rebbe will explain in Ois Gimel. Gimel, Ubir Ha'inyan Sheresh Hashanah, and to explain the idea that Rosh Hashanah Yembrei Adam Harishon Utchilas Masecha, that Rosh Hashanah, which is the day that Adam Harishon was created, is the beginning of Hashem's action. To understand it deeper, Hine Yedua, behold, it is known, the service of man has the power to also change the future. Move on. So from this we can understand with the foretory, of course, that this would apply as it pertains to the service of the first man. He certainly would have that power to change. Every human has the power. Certainly this would apply to the service of Adam Harishon, Shehoyo Yitzir Kapov Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He was created of the hands, so to speak, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he should certainly have that power that people have to change the past. So we're saying, therefore, Sheha'ilui Shapal B'chol HaNivroyim, that elevation, that he impact all creations, like they Hacharos through his announcement. Let's come and let's prostrate Lifnei Hashem is saying before Hashem our Maker, who gam b'negei limitziusam shelifnei avedose, it also impact their entity, their existence, even before he started the work. His work retroactively impacted the past when he said, Boyu nishtachave, their past of all these creation that he said, nishtachave, that they existence before he said that also changed them. Kivon shekavonas habriya milachatchilahi, since the intent of the creation to begin with is sha'odam al yidei avidos yamshich gilu elikus be'olam, that a person through his service should draw down revelation of God's in the world, that is invested in the creation lechatchila. The creation is waiting, or his goal is to have the person bring the revelation of godliness in its creation. Therefore, after it extends into the world, the revelation of godliness, this brings about an elevation in the world's existence the way it was before. And especially, so the beginning of creation goal is to have the person reveal godliness in that world. So that means that the world itself carries in itself that goal from the beginning. And creation is actually especially that's the preparation for the Gila Elikus. It was created so that there could be Gila Elikus in the world. That the idea of world is so that this makes it possible to be a revelation of the world. We have to have a world so that there can be a revelation. So therefore, the person's avodah changes around the way the world was from before. So it's really the world now is begetting that kavanah. This is why Rosh Hashanah, the day that first man was created, to Techilas Masecho, is the beginning of the action. So it's really beginning of creation. Now, before we explained the kavanah, the shleimus, but literally, what does it mean, Techilas Masecha? That's when creation started. It didn't really start then. But now, the Pirush HaPoshut, because when you say the simple meaning, we are going to explain now that the Rosh Hashanah, the day that man was created, is the beginning of Hashem's action. The Pirush HaPoshut ve'inini yotze v'dei pshuto, the simple meaning, and every time the Rebbe brings down the subject matter does not leave the simple meaning. The Techilas Masechu, that's Cholos Kol HaMasim. That's talking about the beginning of all action when things started. That Gam HaMaisim Shehoyu B'Hei Yomim HaRishonim the Maise Bereshis. Everything began because also the actions that were in the 5 days of creation, Koilel Gam Hazman de Yomim Elu, all the created being in those 5 days, and the days themselves, the time, 5 days, they were also creations. So everything really began when? On the day that Adam was created. Why? Kal Yidei Avedose Shel Adam Harishon, because through the service of Adam Harishon, Nase Ilui V'Chnidush Gam B'Metzias Ha'olam Shoy Lifnei Zeh, it brought about an elevation and a novelty in the existence of the world that was before. So it's really being created now because what was before is happening actually now because it brought in that elevation in the world before. That's why this day is the beginning of Masecha, is the beginning of all of creation. So basically, the Rabbi explains that not only the kavona and the shleimus, but it changed creation. So now this new level of creation, which is through Adam Arisha, happens now, and that changes the past. So therefore, this is literally Techilas Masecha. What does it have to do with us today when we daven on Rosh Hashanah? Because this is a repetition of what took place the first time. Just like on Rosh Hashanah, the very first time, when the Adam was created, that brought about a completeness of creation, that the world, the creation became into its completeness, and in a way that this is a novelty, a beginning, something new started. It wasn't before. Sometimes you can say, okay, there was before, but now there is an addition. But this is a whole new thing. This is something totally new. It wasn't there before. This brings in a completeness which wasn't there before. In a similar way, is a Shana which in every year, through the Yidden crowning Hakadosh Baruch Hu, that he should be their king, and all of the world. We are doing the same thing. What happened to Adam Arisha and what Adam Arisha did the very first time. When we crown the Eibishter, Nase Shleimus V'Chidush B'Chol Habriya, there becomes a completeness and a novelty in all of creation. Our Avodah and Rishon brings in a chidush and a shleimus in all of creation. To the extent we created in creation, but then this brings about a shleimus and a chidush also above. This impacts. We bring it in the world, and this impacts also the way it's above, because whatever we do in this world, as a reflection, it mirrors above. Ketoiras, Harava Magid v'Admon Hazokin, as the teaching of the Magid and the Alter Rebbe al Mamer HaMishnah, on the saying of the Mishnah, Dam Malamayla Mimoch, literally means know what's above you, but the Taich did that Dam Malamayla, whatever takes place above is Mimoch, comes from a Yid. The Cholo in Yonim Shalamayla Mimoch comes from you. So through the Yid accomplishing a novelty and a shleimus in the world through his avodah, that brings about mimoch from you. That lamaila also is like that it brings around the shleimus in above and the chiddush that takes place on Rosh Hashanah. This explains the part of Zayim Techilas Ma'asecha, the avodah of Rosh Hashanah. So the Rebbe said before the Tzemach Tzedek, there's two avodas on Rosh Hashanah. One is the HaYom Techilas Ma'asecha, and then we have the Zikaron L'Yom Rishon. So the Rebbe first, in order to understand what the first avodah of HaYom Techilas Ma'asecha, the Rebbe needed to explain how is Rosh Hashanah Techilas Ma'asecha and how it really impacts, that it becomes the beginning of creation, because the Chiddush, the Amaisa, and the Kavanah, and we change the past. It's all the beginning of with the Adam Rishon on the sixth day of creation, which is really the beginning because of all the things that take place. And this is also happening today, as the Rebbe says now, because of the Rosh Hashanah, we may bring about the Chiddush in the world, and then it happens also about. Now we'll go to the second part. What is the Zikaron L'Yom Rishon? That there is a higher level which is not through our influence, but which comes mitzad Hashem, mitzad Chofetz Chesed. Dalet. Le'acharei Omrei Zayim Techilas Masecho. After saying Zayim Techilas Masecho, Moisiv he adds Zikaron L'Yom Rishon, that it's also a remembrance for the first day. The fact that Rishon is also the second aspect of Rishon, it reminds us of the Erev Rishon, who naile yoser mizeh shutchilas masecha. That's a higher level than the fact that this is the beginning of the action, which is on the Rosh Hashanah's aspect, that this is the chiddush that man brings in. We have the remembrance of what happened on the first day, which is higher. Techilas masecha, this part, Zayim Techilas masecha, that's the completeness and the novelty of creation. That was accomplished through the service of man, like I said before. The hamshochash milmailo, but the hamshochash milmailo shal yidei. So what could we bring down through our avodah on Rosh Hashanah, Adam Rishon, the avodah? We bring down Hirak, can only run only from the level which the arousal of below reaches it. Who, as opposed to when we say that it is Yom Rishon, Zikaron L'Yom Rishon, who Kavoshem Avaya, that Tzemach Tzedek Bedrushan Alis, as the Tzemach Tzedek explains in that Mamer, Shaham Shocha Oz Hoysum Mitzad Atzmai. Then the drawing down that came on its own. Over there was no one yet to arouse. After man was created, man brings it down. But at that point, it was before. The pasuk says, the Eibshter didn't put down the rain. There was no man yet to work the field. So there was no his oiris from Adam. So the point here the Rebbe adds is Hainu, it's not only that there wasn't a his oiris because there was nobody there, but it wasn't even shaykh to have it. There was no man at all. Hainu it's not only that there was no arousal from below bepoil in actuality. It didn't even apply. There was nobody there to make the Yisrus Tata. And therefore, so how was the world created? So then the Amshocha came because of blessed kindness. Because the Eibishter wants kind, that's why we created the world. I knew the Rebbe says that it's not just chesed. We could say, I'm sure mitzad chasde. Chasde would mean chesed. Atzilus would be a lower level of chesed. But we say here, ki chofetz chesed hu. The chesed that comes to chesed. The Rebbe explains. Behind it. That is the noise of lozeh shaham shocha achshav. In addition to the fact that now, when we draw down idei aserusa delatato, when we bring down things through our avodah, to the arousal below, through the avodah sa'odom, hi bechinas din umishpat. This is not chesed, this is judgment, and by right, by the law, because we are supposed to bring down, we have to bring it down, we have to work towards it. But then it came without judgment, without the then there was chesed. So it was chesed and judgment, but it's much more than that. Olam chesed yibana, the world was created with chesed. That would be ordinary chesed. But we're saying in the chesed zed the yom rishon, but this chesed of the very first day when Hashem created, Zikaron the yom rishon, that chesed was not just chesed. Hulamayla loy rak meha chesed k'moshu b'midos. So that chesed is not only higher than chesed that is in the midos, chesed v'ura tiferes and atzilus, elagam lamayla mishorshei, but even higher than the root of the midas chesed of atzilus, k'moshu b'moichet. The root of how does the chesed come in emotion? In the midos, it comes through first the moichet. The person has the intellect, the reflection, and he gets the midas of chesed. That's the root of the midah. But this is even higher than the chokhmah. Chofetz chesed is even higher than the root of the midas. Kinyonehu loy chesed, because this aspect of that creation that came mitzad chofetz chesed. Chofetz chesed meaning wants chesed. The difference explained in Chassid is that there is chofetz is the pnimius of rotzen. You have will and you have chofetz. That's the light of that brings that rotzen. So here we're saying that there was a chofetz of chesed that created the world. Inyan hachefetz, which is tainuk. But what chofetz, the tainuk was sheyiyah chesed shbi chesed, but it comes from a higher level than chesed. It comes from the level of chayfetz, from the light. Mizen nimshach liyos olam chesed yibana, and that this comes down, it creates chesed. That the world is chesed yibana comes from the midas chesed, but the origination is chafetz chesed, the tainuk. The mechayfetz zeh nivna hachesed shemimenu nivna ha'olam. From this chayfetz, the tainuk, and the chayfetz of chesed, that builds the chesed, which olam chesed yiboneh, which builds the world. So the Rebbe says we're saying it, we're calling it Zikaron l'yom rishon. Why is it Zikaron l'yom rishon? Not saying Zikaron to the first day of Bereshis. What is saying l'yom rishon? V'yesh loymar שהטעם הפנימי על זה שיום הראשון דהבריאה נקרא בשם יום ראשון. Why are we calling it Zikaron l'yom rishon? Why are we using the Lashon the Kol Yom Rishon? What is the reason? The inner reason is who? I mean, the Pashta reason is because that was the first day, but the inner reason called Yom Rishon is Ki Hagilui the Chafetz Chesed Shehoir B'Yom Zeh, because the revelation of Chafetz Chesed that came on that day, when it came mitzad the Chafetz Chesed, Hu Oir V'Gilui Harishan. It's Yom Harishan. That was the very first in order of the light, the shine, and revelation. Yom Hu Oir V'Gilui. Yom meaning Yom is Oir V'Gilui. Rabbi said before, Vayikol Oir Yom. So the first Gilui, Yom Harishan. This is the first Gilui. Higher than Chesed, and higher than Moichet, higher than Midas, higher than Moichet. Shehu hasiba v'hashodesh lamshochas midas hachesed shememen misav kol omas. That is the root to bringing down the measure of chesed from which all worlds were created. So that's why it's Yom Horishon. It's the very first Gilui. So Zikaron l'Yom Rishon. So that's what we're saying. Now Zikaron Yom Rishon. We said Yom Techilas Masacha, but we're saying Zikaron Yom Rishon. The Bechol Rosh Hashanah, every Rosh Hashanah Idei Shemaskirin Oifen Hayis Havus Shahoysa B'Yom Rishon, through mentioning, through reminding the way creation was on the very first day, on the very first Gilu Shahoyr Oz Sheheir Oz Agil Chafetz Chesed, that at that time there shined that revelation of Chafetz Chesed, the first time creation, and we're reminding that Zikaron, reminding the Yom Rishon. That's the way we bring down that revelation of Chafetz Chesed. That, now we understand the order the Rebbe says of first we say Techilas Masecha, then Zikaron Liyam Rishon. This is the idea of Rishon is the first Zikaron Liyam Rishon is higher from the fact that the Rishon is the beginning of creation. The first Zayim Techilas Masecha, but here Zikaron Liyam Rishon is higher. Why? Techilas Masecha u'mashen nimshchal the Yisrus of the Latata. Techilas Masecha comes through the Yisrus of the Latata that you can reach through your avodah. But the Yom Rishon, Hagilu the Chafetz Chesed, the revelation of Chafetz Chesed, Hu Ha'oir v'Gilu HaRishon, that is the light in the first revelation. Shehu HaShoresh v'Hasiba. That is the root and the cause, the whole say that Ishtaushlus Mailomata. All of the Ishtaushlus above and below, all Ishtaushlus. That the fact there is top and bottom Ishtaushlus, things come down. It all comes from Chafetz Chesed. V'hu atzmoi hu l'mailom hageded the Mailomata. Ilo v'tato. And that alone, the Chafetz Chesed itself is beyond Mailomata Ila Vetato, and that is Mamshich, the Ilum Chesed Yibonah, that should be the Chesed. So we have first Zayim Techilas Masacha, where Avisarusa Tato in Ishtalshlus, where the Avodas Adam reaches, and then we have a level of higher than Ishtalshlus, which is Zikaron Liyam Rishon, which comes from the level of Chafetz Chesed, which in itself is higher than Ishtalshlus. And the Rebbe is going to explain that a Yid brings this about. So we have the Avodah V'Yisarusa de Latata, then we have the Avodah that we're mentioning it, and we're saying what happened before. But how does this connect to a Yid? We're saying the Yisarusa de Latata, the Avodah cannot bring down that level. That's Chafetz Chesed. Yisarusa de Latata only gets to Ishtalshlus. That's Zayim Techilas Masecha. But this is through the Zikaron, through the Yid. Why is the Yid Zikaron help? That's is not through regular Yisarusa de Latata, but that is because Yidden are inherently connected all the ways by the level of higher than Ishtalshlus. Hey, v'hine, zeh sheYisrael al yidei avidosim. Now we're saying in their avodah, there is the avodah of Zayim Techilas Masecha, but here we have avodah by saying Zikaron Liyam Rishon. Shemaskirin oifon hayisavus shoysu b'yom Rishon. What is the avodah? It's not the avodah of Yisrus L'Tata. It's a mentioning what was taking place in the first time that we bring this down. Mamshichim Agilu Hanal, and they bring down this. We bring down the Gilu Magia B'Shorshei Ad B'Chafetz Chesed Atzmei. So they reach to the root till the level of Chafetz Chesed itself by mentioning that avodah. But the Serus del Tata doesn't go to Chafetz Chesed. That is only in the Ishtalshlus. It's only in the Midas Chesed. But here we're saying now that Zikaron Liyam Rishon brings them to the level of Chafetz Chesed by the avodah of how does it bring down? But the Serus del Tata doesn't reach there. That's why This is higher, Zikaron Yemrishin, higher than the Avodah of Yisrus Latata of Zayim Techilas Maasecha, Boyu Nishtach V'Nichro. But this is just the mention that brings down from the higher level. Ki HaShoresh the Yisrael Hu L'mayla Yoser Megam Inyan the Chafetz Chesed. Because the root of Yidden is even higher than this idea of Chafetz Chesed. So therefore a Yid has the ability to bring it down. As we know in the idea, it says the Eibishter had to decide to create the world. So he consulted the souls of tzaddikim, and the Rebbe adds in the brackets, "V'amich kulam tzaddikim," all Yid. What does it mean? The Rebbe wants to bring out that from here we see that the Yidden are rooted all the ways in the level of Atzmus, even higher than the level of Chofetz Chesed, and that's why they can bring it down, the Zikaron, they can bring down the level of Chafetz Chesed. Why does it say? The Eibishter wanted to create the world, so he consulted tzaddikim, Amechul tzaddikim. So that means that the Zeshen is Eurer Kaviyochel Li is Chafetz Chesed. This, so to speak, that we're saying that the Shem had a arousal, an awakening to be Chafetz Chesed, Umitzad Zeh Sha'olo b'machshove, it entered his mind, Nimlach, he had Eibishter wanted to create a world, so he consulted. So how did this Chafetz Chesed start? It went up, Eibishter had a machshove to create the world. That is called, the Rebbe says in the parentheses, machshove atzmis. This was an essence machshove, shalamayla ma'gilu the Chafetz Chesed, which is higher than the revelation of Chafetz Chesed. When there is already the madrege, which is called the tainug in Chesed and the Amshoche, that's already a gilui. But there is a machshove which is not begilui. That's in a machshove atzmis, doesn't come down. It's higher than this level of Chafetz Chesed. What was the machshove? Shasid in Yisrael lekayim Torah mitzvahs velasis direlo yizborach b'tachtonim, that the Yidden in the future will be fulfilling, observing Torah and mitzvahs, and they'll make for Hashem a dwelling place. That was Ola b'machshove, that's going to happen, and they're going to make for what the Yidden are going to do. V'lochein al yidei ha'avodah, because of the Yidden's level in machshove atzmis. So through when a Yid avodah the Yisrael, avodah v'nimshach v'nase gam hagilu the Chafetz Chesed, that also draws down and makes up also the gilui of Chafetz Chesed. The Rebbe brings down in the from Ateres Rosh, explains this idea further. But so move on. So basically, a Yid can do more than Isarusa Latata can do. Isarusa the Latata gets the level of Ishtalshlus. Zikaron Liyim Rishon, from the Eibishter comes the level of Chafetz Chesed, but that comes based on the machshava that the Eibishter desires, that their avodah would bring about, that the light that was ma'orer, that there should want to be a Chafetz Chesed to create the world. Move on. So from this is understood, Shahagilui, the Chafetz Chesed shenasa achshava yedei maseinu v'avodeiseinu, that revelation of Chafetz Chesed that happens now through our actions and our service. Basically, the saying Zeh HaYom Techilas, the Zikaron Liyom Rishon, Unai LeYoser Mikmoshe Hoya Gilui Zeh B'Techilas Habriya. So this is even greater than it was B'Techilas Habriya. So we can just say Zikaron liyem rishon, and this tells us about the great Maila. But the Rebbe brings out now, when we actually do it, the Maila is because Hashem in his Machshava Atzmis wanted to create. The reason for Machshava Atzmis is because of the Yidden that they are going to do. Torah mitzvahs, that brings the Machshava Atzmis, which brings the revelation of Chafetz Chesed. But the Rebbe wants to explain, but now that we're actually doing, it's even in a higher level than the Machshava Atzmis that they're going to do. But now that we get the revelation of Chafetz Chesed, that happens now through Maseinu V'Avodeseinu, which we say HaYom Techilas Maseinu, which we bring down the level of Chafetz Chesed, because now we're getting it through actual avodah. It's greater than it was in the beginning of the creation, which was only because it was in the machshava. But here we actually doing it. This makes a pleasure above. That it's a delight for me that I've said and my will has been done. That this pleasure, this delight, that Hashem's wish had been done, that the Yidden are doing the mitzvahs, who b'atzmus is baruch. That's naser tzoni. This is in the atzmus that gets the pleasure. Nachas ruach lefanai. Shalemayla mehatainug the chafetz chesed, which is even higher than the tainug chafetz chesed. Al yidei shehagilu the chafetz chesed nisoirer v'nimshach haydei ha'avodas ha'odom, that through the revelation of the chafetz chesed, since the gil of chafetz chesed comes through the avodas ha'odom, when we're working today, nimshach boy hanachas ruach v'atainug the naser tzoni. So that brings down the nachas ruach and the tainug that the Eibishter will. So when a Yid does the avodah and he brings down the level of Chafetz Chesed, so he causes a pleasure by atzmus. Eibishter says nachas ruach lefonai, that's before Hashem, and that pleasure becomes a nachas ruach for Hashem, which is a higher level than the tainug of Chafetz Chesed. And so what brings the tainug of Chafetz Chesed, the higher level of tainug? Since the gilui of Chafetz Chesed comes through avodas ha'odom, the answer nimshach boy hanachas ruach v'atainug the naser tzoni. So he gets that higher level of nachas ruach that he becomes in the revelation of Chafetz Chesed. V'zeu gam hatam hapnimi, and this is also the reason azeh shalifnei she'emrim sheresh Hashanah hu zikaron liyem rishon. Before we say Zikaron liyem rishon, emrim shu Techilas ma'asecha. The beginning, the tam, we just said before, because the hamshoch that the person is the sarusa de latato is not as high as the sarusa de leilo of hamshochas from Chafetz Chesed. But now we're saying that the Yid through his avodah brings into the Chafetz Chesed a higher level, the level of Nasir Ritzoini, Nachas Ruach Nasir Ritzoini in the Chafetz. So that's why the Rebbe said the inner reason. Before you say that Rosh Hashanah is as according to Yom Rishon, Erev Shu Techilas Masacha. First, this is according to Yom Rishon. Shelachare Kedima Sa'inyan the Techilas Masacha. Because when we Zikaron Yom Rishon, when the Chafetz Chesed that follows after Techilas Masacha the Avodah, Hamshochas Hagilu the Chafetz Chesed Shelachare Kedima Sa'avodah. The fact that the revelation of Chafetz Chesed comes after you first did Zayim Techilas Masacha, we did Avodah. Hunayla Yoser Mikimoshu Mitzad Atzma is higher than itself. Zikaron Liyem Rish Kimosh Hayav Techilas Abriya than it was in the beginning of creation. The beginning of creation, it was the level of beginning of creation. It was Amshach and Chafetz Chesed. But after the Avodah of a Yid, that Hamshach of Chafetz Chesed gets the higher level, the Tainug of Nachas Ruach Shamarti V'Nasel Ritzoini, which is higher. This is higher than Kameshoy B'Techilas Abriya. So therefore, the inner reason is why do we have to say Zeh Hayom Techilas Masecha before Zikaron L'Yom Rishon? Because ultimately, why is the Zikaron L'Yom Rishon bringing down the highest level, even higher than the Yom Rishon before the is higher when it follows the Techilas Masecha, when it follows the Vedas Odom, basically saying that the Hamshachet that comes on its own, Mitchila, Mitzat Chafetz Chesed, gets a higher level once it comes through the Vedas Odom. The Vedas Odom, when he does the Sarusa de Latato. So it's not only that the Vedas Odom is saying Zikaron L'Yom Rishon. Zikaron L'Yom Rishon is talking about bringing down, but it's talking about Isarusa de Latato, the Techilas Masecha. But when the Zikaron L'Yom Rishon follows the Isarusa de Latato, so the Yid, even though the Isarusa de Latato itself can't reach there, but once the Yid's Avodah is in the way that he could, whatever he could reach, so then when he's Zikaron L'Yom Rishon, reaches into the higher level, the level in which Yidden are connected to Atzmos, and Nimlach V'Nishneim Shel Tzadikim, and over there, your mamshich, the machshava atzmis, should come down in the Chafetz Chesed. So the avodah of the Yid actually brings down the level of Chafetz Chesed as well. There's a accordingly in Rishon, because it's the Neshamas Yisrael. But there is the way it's l'chatchila by creation. But when we actually do the avodah, then it's more than the Chafetz Chesed in the beginning, because our avodah taps into even a higher level than the machshava by itself, and therefore we bring the nachas ruach naser itzayni, and therefore that's his nimshach in the avodah of the yidden, and that's why it comes accordingly in Rishon follows the Zayim Techilas Masecha. Here, the Rebbe needs to explain here the distinction over here between what happens when a Yid's involvement. The Rebbe basically is saying when a Yid is involved through Isarusa de Latato, then the Hamshochet that comes from Chafetz Chesed comes from the higher level of Mashava Atzmis. But we still have to explain, since these oiderus to begin with, before Avodas Adam, before us, also comes mitzad the soiris of Atzmus, which is higher the Hamshach of Chofetz Chesed, and the reason is because b'minim lach b'nishmasayim shel tzadikim, because Yidden are rooted in Atzmus. So, what more is accomplished? What higher level is accomplished through the avodah v'yidin that comes after the practical avodah, after masenu v'avodesenu, after doing it? Since even before we did it, we had the hamshachas and we had these oiderus in the level of machshava atzmis to begin with, and that brought about the hamshach of chafetz chesed. So what else is accomplished when we actually do the avodah? Over there was Hashem sort of imagined that the Yidden will be Mekayim Torah mitzvahs, and that brought about these orders that there should be Hamshachas Chofetz Chesed. But now that we're actually doing, so it now we're tapping in. What higher level is there that we're tapping in? And the Rebbe is going to say there's a difference between the actual and the way it was in the beginning, is how much is invested in the Chofetz Chesed. Whether the Chofetz Chesed that comes from Atzmus gets that Atzmus in the Chofetz Chesed, only through the actual Avodah does it. Let's look inside. Does it come in the Chofetz Chesed? But V'hagam shegam hagilu the Chofetz Chesed shehoye tchilo. Even though the Gil of Chofetz Chesed was in the beginning, before the actual Masenu Avodah, before the service of the people, Odom, Shoyre Sham Shechosahu Ma Tainug Atzmi Babedos Yisrael. The root of the Hamshacha comes from the essence, the light that the Eibishter has in the Avodah of Yisrael. Canal, as we said before, he imagined the delight he'll have from the Avodah Tzadikim. That was the reason that he was awakened with the idea to be Chafetz Chesed. But Mekol Makoim, it's still Al Yidei Avidosim Shel Yisrael Bepoyel. Through the actual service of the Yidden, the Tosef Ilu Naila Yosef, it was added an additional advantage. And we have to say that, because if that was enough, so why did we need to have people actually doing the Dira B'Tachtonim? It's the light, the Hamshach, everything is there already. Kimuvim Mizeh Shebechdei Shetushlam HaKavon the Nesava Kodesh Baruch Hu Liyis Ladiz Baruch Dira B'Tachtonim, that in order to complete the intention that Eibishter wants to do with Tachtonim, we need it to be an actual creation of world. Ad till this physical world. So if everything was already accomplished, the Machshove, Atzmis in Avedosum Shal Yisrael, why do we need the Avodos Shal Yisrael Pel Mamash? But you see, no, we do need that. So it must mean that Avodah accomplishes something more. And then needed Matan Torah. Shows Davke Nasa Toikiv the Kiyam HaOlam. We know we needed Matan Torah also for the world. Not enough the way it was created, the Maisa Bereshis. We know the Chazal says that it was Eretz Yora B'Shakoto, that the world was shaking, and it wasn't as strong until the Eibishter said, that's why it says Yom Hashishi. It's like it says by Matan Torah, Vahiba Yom Hashishi, when Matan Torah came, that the Eibishter was established the earth when it came. That Na'is Nakadosh Baruch Hu Ma'aseh Bereshis by Erev Yom Hashishi. On that day, it was established. So, which means, no, world itself was not yet really fully there, even though it was the Machshava Atzmis and there was this orders of the Kiyam Torah mitzvahs. That wasn't enough. The world didn't exist until we actually do the mitzvah. We need Matan Torah. So, that settled the world. So you see that it wasn't all there finished and accomplished by the creation. And after Matan Torah, the Giv Torah, there needs to be the service of the man after Matan Torah in actuality. Limud Torah, there needs to be the study of Torah, but often in such a manner that God limud shemev demaisa. The study needs to bring to action the kima mitzvahs b'poil in actual kima mitzvahs. So you're going to say nothing is accomplished more here, but Atzmus had that machshava right in the beginning before everything was given in the first day, Yom Rishon. This was all in Hashem's knowledge and in His thought, even before. And that thought was the reason, that was actually cause that he was married to be Chofetz Chesed, because the machshava atzmis. So, see, there's something more. So, what more happens over here through the actual avodas adam? So the Rebbe explains, Ki ha-machshava shehoyse mekoydem, hi machshava atzmis shebatzmus yizborach shel mayla megillah. That machshava that was before the creation of the world, the one that brought to the creation, before the avodah, before Matan Torah, that's a machshava atzmis yizborach that cannot come down revel. V'zeh shemitzad machshava zu nase, ha'is oirer the Chofetz Chesed. So how did that machshava that was higher than Gilui bring about that aroused the Chofetz Chesed, which is Gilui? Hurak ba'oifun da'avdolah, that is in a way that it was separated. You had the machshava atzmis, and from it was separated that machshava Chofetz Chesed. It wasn't invested. The machshava atzmis is not in the Chofetz Chesed. Hainu. The machshava remained in its atzmus. That was not extended in the matter of chofetz chesed. It's separated. So the idea, the chofetz chesed that does become through that machshava atzmis, that the delight that the Eibishter has with the avodah, hurak achefetz v'hataynu v'chesed v'giluyim. So what was the chofetz chesed that came through it? It wasn't the machshava atzmis. It was a chofetz chesed of chesed and giluyim, taynu v'chesed v'giluyim. But not the atzmis is not invested in it. But by yidei avidosei, avodas adam bepoyel, and the fact that through the avodah of a yid, in actuality, nase gilui ha'atzmus, that brings about the revelation of atzmus, didelo yizbarach la'atzmusei, a dwelling for atzmus, not for giluyim, not for chofetz chesed. So the Rebbe explains there a very strong point to make the distinction. Even though it was the cause for Chafetz Chesed, but over there it came by Havdalah. What comes down is Giluyim and not Atzmus in the world. But through the Avodah of a Yid, over there you make a Direloi Latzmusay. Over there you get the Machshava Atzmus itself that comes down through the Avodah of a Yid. Rabbi will continue to explain now that this is also going to be the difference between the way it's now and the way it's also Lavoi, that the elevation of the world in the future will see that revelation of Atzmos through the Avodah. Till Mashiach, till the Osud Lavoi, we have the level of Amshachas Atzmos, which is only in Giluyim, not Atzmos itself. But in La'asud Lavoi, we will see that revelation, as the Rebbe will continue to explain in the next Oisius.